Hi, my name's Odessa. I paid for my sister's promotion party, every flower, every glass of champagne. And yet, she handed me a tray and made me serve drinks like I was part of the staff. No one said my name, not once. And that wasn't even the worst part. What if I told you that being erased wasn't an accident? It was a family tradition? Would you stay and listen? Or would you leave, like I did? Because what came next changed everything. I arrived 15 minutes before the official start time, just as the hotel staff were finishing the final touches. The chandelier light spilled across the marble floor like gold dust, and the scent of peonies, ones I had personally selected, floated through the air. I handed the valet my keys, clutching a thick envelope that held the final invoice and the guest list I'd printed that morning. My name was on every page, but not once would it be said out loud tonight. Inside, Maribel's assistant gave me a nod, the kind you give to someone you think works for the venue. No eye contact, no welcome. Just a brief look and a gesture toward the ballroom, as if I needed instructions. I walked past her without a word, heels muted by the carpet, eyes scanning the space I'd practically designed. There were no signs of me anywhere. The theme, the playlist, the seating chart, every inch of this place carried my fingerprints, yet I felt like a ghost haunting my own generosity. I moved to the side, standing behind a column near the bar, watching guests begin to trickle in. Laughter, air kisses, firm handshakes. A crowd gathering around Maribel like she was the mayor of Austin. "She's just magnetic," someone whispered. "A woman like that? Born to lead." I didn't interrupt. I didn't even blink. I just stood still, the silence in my chest louder than the jazz quartet warming up near the terrace. An hour in, the room was buzzing. I saw Maribel weaving through the guests, a champagne flute in one hand, the other reaching out for shoulder pats and congratulations. Then she spotted me. Her expression didn't change, not even a flicker of surprise. She walked straight over, and without lowering her voice, said, "You're good at being subtle, right? Grab that tray and help pass these around. Our server bailed last minute." I thought she was joking. For a second, I even half smiled. But she was already placing the tray in my hands. I stood there, stunned, balancing 10 crystal flutes filled with expensive champagne I had paid for. She didn't wait for my answer. She turned back to her crowd, tossing a "thanks, sis" over her shoulder like I was a hotel intern. I didn't want to cause a scene. That's not my way. I told myself to breathe, to keep calm. Maybe she was stressed. Maybe it was just a slip. But then a man, someone I'd met once at a distant cousin's wedding, tapped me gently on the arm and said, "Could you grab me a scotch when you're done with that?" I nodded. Because that's what you do when you've been conditioned your entire life not to make trouble. But inside, I was unraveling. It wasn't the tray. It wasn't even the drink request. It was that no one in that moment, no one, saw me for what I was. A sister, a human being, a person who funded this celebration out of nothing but love and an aching hope to reconnect. Later, I walked toward the far end of the ballroom, hoping for air. I passed a group of older women sipping wine and complimenting Maribel's speech. How poised she sounded, how driven she must be. My mother, Velma, was among them, laughing, and saying, "She's always been the bright one." I paused at the doorway, hidden by the arch. I didn't expect her to see me, and of course, she didn't. When the slideshow started, the lights dimmed. A montage of Maribel's career highlights played on the grand screen. Her first internship, boardroom victories, corporate retreats, and photos with executives. The crowd applauded at all the right moments. I waited for just one photo of us. Of me. Of the night I stayed up proofreading her cover letter. Of the time I helped her rehearse for her panel interview when she nearly quit. There was nothing. Not a single frame. Not even a blurry background moment. Even ghosts leave evidence. Apparently, I didn't. Something inside me stilled. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even sadness. It was a final, quiet understanding that I was never part of the picture she wanted to show the world. I stepped out into the hallway, walking past the coats, the catering carts, and a bellhop who didn't even glance at me. The air was cooler out here, untouched by perfume and false praise. I stood there, letting the distant sound of clinking glasses fade behind the heavy doors. I opened my purse, pulled out the printed hotel receipt with my name on it, Odessa Lynn, paid in full, and placed it neatly on the edge of the bar counter where the staff would surely find it. A quiet truth dropped into a noisy lie. I didn't storm out. I didn't slam the door. I just walked. Nobody stopped me. Nobody noticed. But for the first time in a long time, that didn't feel like loss. It felt like freedom. By the time I reached the end of the hallway, I hadn't stopped moving. My legs carried me past the restrooms, past the coat check, through the double doors that led to the rear foyer of the hotel. I stood there for a while, letting the quiet hum of a nearby vending machine drown out the applause still echoing from the ballroom. I hadn't planned on going back in, but something about the echo of clapping, too enthusiastic, too polished, pulled me toward the ballroom's cracked door like a string tugging at a bruise. Through the narrow gap, I could see the screen flicker to life. The lights dimmed, and the slideshow began. A curated presentation of Maribel's journey, from her college graduation to early promotions. A few carefully staged photos from what looked like leadership retreats, and one shot where she stood at a podium with a fake mic smile. The crowd clapped in rhythm. I spotted a few heads nodding with admiration. Some even wiped away a tear or two, as if this was a homecoming story, a triumph against odds. "And we extend our deepest thanks," the MC announced, "to Maribel and the entire Meliora Capital team for making tonight possible." My jaw tightened. Not a single mention, not a footnote, not a half sentence tucked at the end. It would have been easier if they'd just ignored me. But this wasn't silence. This was substitution. I hadn't just been left out. I'd been replaced. You can survive being forgotten, I thought. But being rewritten? That's a different kind of grief. The lights came back up to a roar of applause. Maribel smiled, gracious and grand, the way she always did when the world agreed with her version of events. I stepped back from the doorway and leaned against the wall, letting the cool plaster steady my spine. Mom appeared minutes later. I could hear her heels before I saw her. She was headed toward the restroom, chatting with a few older women, her laughter light and unbothered. I waited until she peeled off from the group before stepping forward. She noticed me then, briefly. "Can I talk to you for a second?" I asked quietly. She glanced at her watch. "Make it quick, honey. I told them I'd be right back." I held out my phone, screen lit with the email confirmation from the hotel. Client, Odessa Lynn. Paid, $11,250. Card ending in 3310. "You knew I covered everything tonight, but you stood there and smiled while they thanked her company." She waved her hand as if swatting away a mosquito. "Maribel needs this. You know how hard she's worked." "So have I," I said, keeping my voice even. "I didn't ask for a spotlight. I asked not to be erased." Mom gave a short, dry laugh. "You always take things too personally. Don't start. Let your sister shine." That sentence did something final to me, like a switch flipping off inside a room that was already dim. It wasn't confusion anymore. It wasn't me misreading things. It was a decision, one she'd already made, one she hadn't needed to explain, because in her mind, it was just obvious. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice or ask how many times she'd chosen Maribel before this. I just nodded, the kind of nod people give when they're done trying to fix what's never been theirs to repair. I returned to the coat check and found an empty bench near the window. The sound from the ballroom faded into the background again, muffled conversations, silverware against china, clinking glass over empty gratitude. I sat there, pulling up the email again, scanned the details, reread them, not because I needed to, but because seeing my name in black and white was the only place it felt real anymore. My name, my money, my silence. I whispered, mostly to myself, if they've written me out, I get to rewrite the ending. For a long while, I just stared at the screen. Then I forwarded the message to my personal inbox, added the attachments, the full invoice, the final receipt, and renamed the file, Who really paid.pdf. I didn't send it out, not yet. I just wanted to hold proof. In a world where facts had been replaced with impressions, I wanted to hold something that didn't lie. When I stood, I didn't head for the exit. Not yet. I walked back toward the main room, heels clicking on the tile, spine straighter than when I'd first arrived. I didn't go back to be seen. I went back to watch. This time, not from hope, but with eyes that finally saw. I lingered near the ballroom entrance for a minute, keeping close enough to hear, but far enough to not be pulled into another charade. The laughter coming from inside no longer carried the warmth it used to. It was hollow, overly rehearsed, like a soundbite played on repeat. As I turned to head toward the coat check, a man brushing past bumped into my shoulder. He didn't stop or look back. Not rude, just dismissive, like I wasn't part of the evening at all. I let it go. I was starting to see that being invisible to these people wasn't an accident. It was how they preferred it. Back at the reception table near the foyer, a stack of leftover programs sat in a neat pile. I picked one up out of instinct. Cream-colored paper, embossed lettering, clean layout. I flipped through the list of guests and honorees. Maribel's name was bolded, of course. Underneath the event support section, my eyes caught something that made my stomach tighten. Mira Lynn, event assistant. Mira, not Odessa, assistant, not sponsor, not family, not sister. I read it again, slower this time, as if I'd misunderstood. But there it was. Not a typo. A reframing. A new role assigned to me without permission. A different name handed to me like a borrowed coat that didn't fit. That's when I understood. It wasn't just about leaving me out. It was about replacing me with someone more convenient. Someone who didn't ask questions. Someone who didn't need to be remembered later. Names aren't just spelling, they're decisions. I stepped outside, onto the back terrace where a few guests were milling around under strings of warm lights. The breeze had picked up, carrying the scent of jasmine and whatever hope I'd still held on to earlier that night. "Hey!" The voice came from behind me. Familiar. I turned and saw Nate, an old classmate from college. He'd been part of our study group senior year. We hadn't spoken in ages, but I remembered him as kind, sharp, a little socially awkward in a charming way. He smiled and gave me a quick hug. "Didn't expect to see you here tonight? You working this?" I blinked. "Sorry?" "You're with the hotel, right?" He gestured toward the staff station. "You looked like you were coordinating stuff earlier, carrying trays and all that." I paused. He meant it as casual, not cruel, but the words landed with weight. I gave him a soft nod. "What made you think I was staff?" He chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Well, I saw you walking around earlier with drinks, and your name badge. It didn't say Knox, or even family. It just said Mira. I figured you were part of the team that put this all together. Part of the team, part of the background." I nodded again, but slower this time. "I was involved," I said, "just not in the way they chose to remember." He looked embarrassed. "Wow, sorry, I didn't mean—" "It's okay," I cut in gently. "You weren't supposed to know. That was the point." There was a beat of silence between us. Then I offered him a smile. Not bitter, just finished, and walked past him without saying another word. Out by the stone garden bench, I sat down and let my body settle into the weight of it all. No one had corrected the name. No one had thought twice. And maybe that's what hurt more than anything else. The ease with which I could be rewritten, even by people who once knew me. I pulled out my phone, opened my email app, composed a new message. Subject line: correction. Body: Odessa Lynn, person, sister, sponsor. I didn't add anything else. No explanation, no anger. Just a reintroduction of who I was before they tried to reassign me. I saved the draft. I named it Proof of Self. And I sat there, watching the lights flicker through the trees, thinking how strange it was to feel more real in a saved draft than I ever had at that entire party. By the time I stepped back inside the hotel lobby, the sky outside had darkened to a deep navy blue. I glanced at the oversized clock behind the concierge. 9:42 p.m. The crowd inside the ballroom was still going strong, judging by the music and sudden bursts of laughter echoing through the corridor. I didn't rejoin them. I kept walking until I reached the valet station where I'd left my car. As soon as I climbed in, I locked the door, slid off my heels, and just sat there for a moment with the engine running. There's a kind of quiet that only happens when everything has already been said, at least inside your own mind. I reached for my phone and opened my email app. I wasn't even thinking clearly, just tapping through the inbox like muscle memory. That's when I saw it. Subject line: Final invoice, Driscoll event, 88249. I tapped. The PDF opened instantly. It was the same file I'd already seen earlier in the week when I'd prepaid. But now, this version had been finalized and closed by the hotel's billing department. Under the client section, it read, Meliora Capital. Under payment method, Amex ending in 4462. That's my card. No shared billing. No notes about reimbursement. No indication that anyone else had been involved. They took my money, then rewrote the name at the top. I stared at it for a long time, holding the phone tightly in both hands. Then I took a screenshot and saved a copy to my cloud drive. I forwarded it to myself again, twice, because something in me no longer trusted a single file to stay where I left it. I didn't cry. Not this time. Instead, I leaned my head back against the headrest and muttered, They erased my name, but kept my money. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen counter with a mug of black coffee and my laptop open. The window above the sink let in that soft, gray morning light that only Texas seems to get right. The birds outside were busy with whatever birds do after rain. I logged into my bank portal, not because I didn't believe the invoice, but because I needed to see the trail. What I found wasn't surprising, but it still managed to burn. There was the initial deposit to the hotel, followed by smaller charges across the past 2 weeks. $483.25. Spa Botanica, $897.50. Luxe Couture, Maribel's custom gown, no doubt, $210. Private valet upgrade, all billed to my account, all unauthorized. I clicked into the detailed statements and began printing every page. Not to confront, not to accuse, just to build a file of what was mine, what had been taken. Each sheet that slid from the printer felt like another nail closing a box I would no longer sit quietly inside. When I was done, I labeled a folder in sharp black marker. Evidence, not emotion. I slid everything inside and placed it on the dining table. I added a sticky note on top with 5 words. They chose to forget me. And just below it, I choose to remember. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to send rage-filled texts. The facts were louder than anything I could ever say. Later that afternoon, I called the hotel. A polite young man answered. I kept my voice steady. Yes, I need to confirm who signed the event contract for the promotion party on April 8th. Event code 88249. Ma'am, we can't release that information unless you're the cardholder on file. I didn't hesitate. I am the cardholder. There was a pause. I could hear fingers tapping a keyboard. Oh, yes, I see. Odessa Lynn? That's right. Would you like a copy of the signed contract? Yes, I said. Everything. I want it all in writing. He promised to email it within the hour. I ended the call, slid my phone across the table, and looked out the window. Maribel had thanked everyone except the person who made it happen. She had passed off my generosity as her corporate charm. My mother had smiled and nodded like it was natural. And the guests? They applauded a fiction because it was easier than asking who the credits really belonged to. But numbers don't lie. Receipts don't vanish. And I was done letting them write my part in disappearing ink. I stayed seated at the table a while longer after the call ended. There wasn't anything more to do just yet. The file was building itself, page by page, like a quiet courtroom I was preparing. Outside the kitchen window, The early light was sliding down the fence line, pale and unbothered. My coffee had gone cold. I didn't care. A notification buzzed across my phone screen. I glanced down. It was a tag alert on LinkedIn. I wasn't expecting much. Probably another automatic, "Congrats to Maribel Knox on her promotion" type of post. But the name in the alert wasn't hers, it was mine. Or rather, it was my face. I tapped the link and waited as the page loaded. There it was. A glossy, filtered photo of Maribel beaming at the center of the room, her arm raised slightly in the middle of a speech. And just behind her, half-blurred, tray in hand, smile halfway between discomfort and obedience, was me. The caption below read, "An unforgettable evening celebrating the vision and leadership of our own Maribel Knox. Thank you to everyone who made it magical." No mention, no tag. But there I was, framed neatly into her story. My expression, my silence, my unpaid labor, wrapped in pixels and marketed like it belonged to someone else. "She didn't just take my money," I said quietly. "She turned me into a prop." I took a screenshot of the post, saved it to the folder I'd started yesterday. Then another alert came through, this time on Instagram. Different platform, same photo, same hollow praise from colleagues who had never spoken to me that night. You'd be surprised how fast something can become official once it's been shared enough times. Around 7:12 a.m., my phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from my mother. "Don't make a scene about a photo. Let your sister have this. Let her have this." As if she hadn't already had everything else. I didn't answer right away. I reread the message 3 times. Not because I didn't understand it. Because I did. Because it was so exactly like her to say that. Because this was the script I'd grown up with. Let her have this. Don't overreact. You're stronger. You don't need the credit. Be the bigger person. I put the phone down. I paced the kitchen once, then twice. My eyes burned. Not from tears, but from exhaustion. The kind of exhaustion that builds when you've been nodding through your own erasure for years. Then I picked the phone back up and typed, "This is the last time you'll ask me to be quiet just so she can be louder." I hit send. There was no reply. Just 3 gray dots that appeared for a few seconds, then vanished. No follow-up, no apology, just silence. And honestly, that told me more than 1,000 words ever could. I sat back down, pulled out my laptop, and opened a clean browser window. Logged into my professional account. Drafted a short post. Simple. Factual. Cold. Sometimes the cost of silence is higher than the price of truth. Full invoices and client details available upon request. No tags, no accusations, no names. But anyone who'd been at that event would know exactly who I was talking about. I posted it, then closed the laptop. Within the hour, the private messages started trickling in. Quiet ones, some supportive, some curious, a few neutral, a handful subtle but sharp. I always thought something felt off about that party. Good for you. Took guts to say something. You handled that with more class than I ever could. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. Because this wasn't about making noise. This was about finally breaking the silence. At 2:17 p.m., an email dropped into my inbox from Maribel's corporate account. Subject line, "What are you doing?" No greeting, no context. Just a single paragraph. "You're making things worse than they are. Stop now before it all comes crashing down." I stared at it for a moment, then calmly clicked forward, sent it to my evidence folder, and marked it with a red flag. I didn't need to reply. Instead, I whispered to the empty kitchen. Now we're both in the picture. After forwarding Maribel's email, I stared at the blinking cursor in my inbox for a long time. Not because I was unsure what to do next. On the contrary, I was certain. I just needed to be precise. Clean. Controlled. I wasn't about to fall into the stereotype of the angry woman lashing out. No, what I had was not rage. It was record-keeping. I opened a new message and began attaching documents from the folder labeled Evidence, not Emotion. The hotel invoice, the payment receipt with my full name, the email thread with the catering team, my floral design notes, the floor plan mock-up, and screenshots from the event group chat. All things that had been invisible to the public, but were very, very real. I didn't write a long introduction, no preamble, no melodrama. Subject line, correction, about last night body. I'm sending this to clarify a few details regarding the recent promotion event held at the Driscoll. Attached are records confirming the funding, coordination, and vendor contracts were handled by me personally. There's no request here, just a record for anyone who values transparency. Respectfully, Odessa Lynn, I BCC'd everyone from the guest list. I didn't pause to wonder how they'd take it. I didn't ask myself if it would change anything, because it wasn't about their opinion anymore. It was about having the truth on record, whether they read it or not. By the time I hit send, it was almost 4:00 in the afternoon. The sun was angling toward the neighbor's rooftop, casting long lines through my blinds. I closed my laptop, stood up, poured myself a glass of water, and sipped it in silence. 20 minutes later, the first reply came in. I had no idea. Thank you for setting the record straight. Then another. Wow, this makes sense now. A third. I feel foolish for applauding a version of that night that clearly wasn't complete. And then this one, from a partner at Maribel's firm. Odessa, I'm sorry for the role we played in your erasure. It wasn't intentional, but that doesn't excuse it. I didn't reply to any of them. I archived each message after reading it once. They weren't apologies I needed, but they were acknowledgments. And acknowledgments, I've learned, are a kind of currency in a world where silence used to be the default. Just after 6, as the sky turned that soft, bruised purple, another notification pinged, this time on LinkedIn, a public post. I clicked it open, already expecting the worst. Instead, I saw my name, not tagged, but centered. For anyone praising the flawless execution of last night's event, credit goes to Odessa Lynn. I saw her running point on everything, from setup to vendor coordination. It's a disservice to pretend she didn't exist in that room. Don't rewrite women like her out of history just because they don't demand the mic. It wasn't signed by someone close. It wasn't a friend doing a favor. It was a guest, a man I barely remembered speaking to, who had taken it upon himself to say something. The post began to spread. Likes, comments, reposts. I didn't reply. I let it stand on its own. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is let others say the truth for you. Without coaching, without begging. By 7:40 my phone rang. I recognized the number immediately, Maribel's assistant. I didn't answer at first. Let it go to voicemail. Then she called again. I picked up. Her voice was thin, like someone holding a cup with both hands so it doesn't rattle. Hi Odessa, it's Claire. Maribel wants to talk. She's saying it's all been misunderstood, that you're blowing this out of proportion and it's not what it looks like. I didn't even flinch. She's right. A pause. Claire didn't know what to do with that. It's worse, I added. Claire tried to regroup. She'd like to meet, face to face. No drama, just to explain. Can you give her that? No? Another silence, heavier this time. Then Claire said, Okay, I'll let her know. I ended the call and sat back down at my desk. Opened a new document, typed the title in bold, Statement of Withdrawal, subtitle, From the Family That Never Claimed Me. And then I stopped typing, because I'd already said enough. I closed the laptop gently, my hands still resting on the keyboard for a moment longer than necessary. The house was silent, except for the occasional creak of old pipes expanding under the spring air. I stood, walked to the sink, and rinsed out my coffee mug. Everything about that act felt strangely ceremonial, like I'd just finished writing a final chapter, even though I knew the story was far from done. It wasn't until later that night, while checking my credit score on a whim, that I noticed something strange. There was a dip, not catastrophic, but enough to make me look closer. I opened the full credit report and scrolled down, line by line, until I found the source. A personal loan from 2019, listed under a boutique financial firm that had since dissolved. $27,000. Marked closed, but still impacting my record. I didn't recognize it. I'd never taken out that loan. I sat up straighter, heart pounding, not in fear, but in disbelief that somehow, even now, there were things I hadn't uncovered yet. The next morning, I called the bank's fraud department, explained what I'd found, asked them to pull the documentation from that loan. The representative was polite, efficient, and promised to send over the original file via encrypted email. The PDF landed in my inbox just after noon. I opened it, and immediately my stomach sank. There was my name, Odessa L. Knox, my old married name, the one I hadn't used in years, my address, my social security number, and a signature at the bottom of the application. My name, written in a hand that wasn't mine. It wasn't forged sloppily. It was deliberate, familiar, confident enough to suggest whoever signed it had done it before, maybe more than once. That wasn't a forgery, I said out loud. That was familiarity. I forwarded the document to my evidence folder. Then, on a hunch, I messaged an old friend from college who worked in cybersecurity. We hadn't spoken in over a year, but he responded within an hour. "Can you trace the IP address on the original submission?" I asked. "Give me 5 minutes," he replied. 7 minutes later, my phone buzzed. IP originated from a corporate server belonging to Velmark Partners. "That's where your sister used to work, right?" Yes. Yes, it was. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even clench my jaw. I just opened my legal folder and started a new section, Criminal Use of Identity. That same afternoon, between calls and screenshots and folders full of files, I saw a new post pop up on Maribel's social media. A feature in a mid-tier business magazine. Nothing fancy, but enough for her to keep feeding her narrative. She looked polished, controlled, smiling next to her firm's logo. Behind her, on a shelf, was a framed photo from the party. She'd cropped the image, blurred my face slightly, but I recognized my dress, my profile, the way I held that tray. Still using me. Still pretending I didn't exist, while building her brand on the shoulders I used to lend her. I clicked into the post, typed a single comment. "Please take this down. The person you borrowed isn't for sale." Then I closed the tab. I didn't wait for replies. I didn't care who saw it. It wasn't for them. It was for me. That evening, I met with an attorney, a friend of a friend, someone who knew how to handle things quietly but thoroughly. I laid out every printed page, every email thread, every bank statement and invoice. She scanned the materials slowly, methodically. Her brows creased as she reached the loan documents. "If this is accurate," she said, "we're not talking about hurt feelings. This is criminal impersonation, federal territory." I nodded. "I'm not here to ruin her. I'm here to stop pretending I'm okay with being erased." She looked at me, really looked. "And you're prepared for what this might trigger? With your family, publicly?" "She already took everything that mattered," I said calmly. "Now I'm just taking back my name." There was nothing righteous about the way I said it. No heat, no fury, just clarity. I left the meeting with a manila envelope tucked under my arm. On the front, the words, "Petition to open investigation, identity misuse." It felt heavier than its weight, because it didn't just carry proof. It carried the truth they never thought I'd dare name. 3 weeks later, I stood once again in the grand lobby of the Driscoll Hotel, only this time with purpose wrapped in a manila envelope. The last time I'd been here, I'd walked out without a word, leaving behind the version of myself they preferred. Quiet, compliant, forgettable. This time, I wasn't staying long. I was here to finish something, not to witness more of the performance. The concierge looked up as I approached, recognition flickering in his eyes. He straightened slightly. "I'm here regarding the event under Maribel Knox," I said. "Room 4A." He tapped on his keyboard, then paused. It appears the charges are pending. Catering, sound, floral arrangements. However, the original card on file. That would be mine, I interrupted calmly. He glanced up. I need you to cancel every service that hasn't already been paid in full. There was a long pause. He scanned the records again, eyes darting. Yes, ma'am. You're still listed as the financial guarantor. Would you like a printed confirmation? I would. He printed 2 copies. I signed one. The moment the pen left the page, I felt the balance shift. Not loudly, not dramatically, just finally. Down the hall, soft music filtered out of the ballroom. I could hear the murmur of voices inside, laughter starting to rise. The party hadn't begun yet, but the facade had already returned. I walked slowly toward the main room, the click of my heels steady against the polished floor. 2 servers passed me with trays of untouched hors d'oeuvres. One glanced at me, then did a double take. I saw him nudge the other. I stopped just outside the entrance. A few staff were rolling away carts. The florist's team, confused, began pulling down half-finished table arrangements. A man in a headset barked into a walkie-talkie, "Hold the slideshow! We're not greenlit yet!" Then I saw her. Maribel standing near the center of the room, perfectly styled. Her expression fell the moment she noticed the shifting energy. And then she saw me. Odessa? She said my name like it had thorns. I stepped into the room, handed the concierge copy of the cancellation form to a woman in a blazer who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. You'll need to find another wallet for tonight, I told my sister. Maribel walked toward me, but her stride lacked its usual command. Her assistant, Claire, trailed behind her, visibly pale. What is this? Maribel asked, gesturing at the disassembled chaos behind me. Why are they stopping everything? Because the bill just got real. She glanced at her assistant. I thought you said this was handled. Claire didn't answer. I reached into my folder and handed Maribel an envelope. It's all in there. Formal complaint filed. Unauthorized use of identity. Fraud. Cease and desist regarding my image. I paused. You're welcome to have your party, but you'll need to pay for it yourself. Her mouth opened, then closed. For once, she had no words ready. This isn't revenge, I said. It's removal. She blinked, confused. I didn't think it mattered to you. And there it was. The sentence that told me she still didn't understand. That's the problem, I replied. You never think what I am matters. She reached out, maybe to argue, maybe to placate. I didn't let her finish. Instead, I turned and walked, past the waitstaff, the florist, the manager holding a clipboard. None of them stopped me. No one asked questions. One of the caterers clapped, just once. Someone else joined. It wasn't applause. It was acknowledgement. I kept moving. Outside, the sky had shifted to a gold-tinged haze. Early evening sun kissing the tops of buildings like a quiet benediction. My ride was already waiting by the curb. I got in and closed the door without looking back. On the seat beside me was a sealed white envelope with Maribel's name written in my handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper, no paragraph, no plea, just one final sentence. This is the last thing I'll ever pay for you. And it cost me everything. The air felt sharper on the coast. Maybe it was the salt or the way the breeze moved without needing permission. I had only been in Maine for 3 weeks, but each morning I woke up here, I felt less like I was waiting for someone to find me, and more like I'd finally stopped trying to be found. The apartment was modest. 1 bedroom. White walls. Clean windows that caught the morning sun just right. I'd furnished it with care. Nothing fancy, just functional, warm, quiet. The kind of space that doesn't apologize for being small. That morning, like the last 6, I brewed a cup of tea and sat at the small table near the window, watching the sea move in and out. My phone buzzed once. A missed call from Velma. That made 9. She hadn't left voicemails, just the calls, spaced out like someone trying to convince themselves they'd done their part without having to actually say the words. I didn't call back. I didn't block her either. I just let the silence sit where it needed to. I used to think peace came from someone finally saying sorry. Now I know it begins when you no longer need them to. I sipped slowly, the warmth filling my chest. The ache I used to carry behind my ribs had dulled. Not gone, but changed. Like a scar that no longer tugs when you stretch. Later that afternoon, I opened my email to check a few updates from freelance clients. Nestled between subject lines about contracts and invoices was one from a name I hadn't seen in a while. A former colleague from Austin. The message was brief. Heard from someone in HR that Maribel's been placed under formal investigation. They're digging into financials going back 5 years. Thought you'd want to know. I stared at it. Not in triumph, just quiet understanding. Actions find their way back to the people who took them. I didn't reply, didn't forward it, didn't even save it. I closed the email and let it dissolve into the rest of my day. That chapter wasn't mine anymore. As evening settled in, I pulled a worn notebook from the bookshelf and sat down with it in my lap. I hadn't opened it since I left Texas. Inside were scattered thoughts, notes to myself, clipped pages from a past life. Tucked between 2 blank pages was a half-started letter addressed simply, Mom. The handwriting was mine, slanted and precise. I hadn't remembered starting it. I turned to a new page, picked up a pen, and wrote slowly, deliberately, not to send, but to say, You raised a daughter who stayed quiet for love until silence became the lie. That was enough. I closed the notebook. I didn't rip it out. I didn't burn it. I just let it stay there, because some truths don't need to be spoken to matter. Around sunset, I walked down the path behind my building toward the beach. The tide was pulling out, leaving little ridges in the sand like the palm lines of the earth. I sat near the rocks and pulled something from my pocket. A photo. It was from the party, the one that made its rounds online, the one where I stood in the background with a tray in my hands, blurred just enough to look like someone hired for the night. I'd kept it, not out of sentiment, but to remind myself of how far people will go to shrink you down to a version that suits their comfort. I rolled the picture gently, slid it into a small glass bottle, and sealed the top with a cork I'd brought from home. I didn't throw it. I buried it in the sand, deep enough that it wouldn't be found by the next tide. As I stood, a man jogged past on the trail behind me. He nodded. I nodded back. Nothing more, no recognition, no knowing glance. Just 2 people sharing the same light. And that, I realized, was what I'd wanted all along. Not applause, not attention. Just the space to exist as I was, not as I was edited to be. I turned back toward the path, hands empty, heart full enough. Some stories don't end with fireworks. Some just let go, like breath you didn't realize you'd been holding. Final line, some endings don't echo. They exhale. Sometimes the hardest part isn't what they did. It's what you let continue in the name of keeping the peace. I spent years believing that staying silent was noble, that being the strong one meant absorbing disappointment with grace. But silence can be its own kind of betrayal, especially when it keeps others comfortable at your expense. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. You don't need permission to take up space in your own story. You don't need applause to prove you were right, and you definitely don't need to carry the weight of a family that only remembers you when it's convenient. I didn't get an apology. I didn't get closure wrapped in a bow, but I got something better, myself back. And in the end, that was enough. Now I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Or been asked to shrink yourself so someone else could shine a little brighter? Let me know in the comments. Just type 1 if this story touched you, or tell me where you're watching from. And if this video stirred something in you, or maybe even healed something, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. There are more real stories coming, and maybe one of them might be yours. End scene.